The small, windowless room, intended for brief, supervised visits, was slick with blood. It was Thursday late afternoon, inside the State Correctional Institution, Phoenix, a sprawling complex situated in the pastoral landscape outside Collegeville, Pennsylvania. This specific room, no more than 10 feet by 12, furnished only with a metal table bolted to the floor and 4 uncomfortable chairs, was usually a place of strained, quiet conversation, a temporary bridge between the incarcerated world and the free one. On this day, it had become a contained scene of unimaginable violence. Correctional officers, responding to sounds described initially as a muffled struggle, discovered the horror. The woman on the floor was identified as 38-year-old Sarah Jenkins. She had arrived that morning for a scheduled visit. The man standing over her, restrained quickly by the arriving officers, was her husband, Michael Jenkins, an inmate serving a lengthy sentence for aggravated assault. The room itself offered few conventional weapons. There were no knives, no firearms, nothing that could have been smuggled through the rigorous security checkpoints. The table was metal, the chairs the same, yet, the injuries sustained by Sarah Jenkins indicated a brutal sustained attack. Investigators arriving on the scene noted the unnatural silence that had fallen over the immediate area. After the initial chaos of discovery and restraint, the air conditioning hummed faintly, a sterile counterpoint to the visual evidence of a visceral, violent act. The door had been forced open from the outside by officers responding to the disturbance call. Inside, the scene was meticulously documented. Photographs captured the position of the body, the spatter patterns on the walls and floor, the overturned chairs. There was a specific object near the body that drew immediate attention, its mundane appearance starkly contrasting with its apparent use. It was an item commonly found in such rooms, overlooked in its simplicity, now imbued with a terrifying significance. This object, and the scene it was part of, became the immediate focus of the forensic team. They worked methodically, sealing the room, establishing a chain of custody for every potential piece of evidence. Michael Jenkins, visibly agitated but offering no immediate explanation, was quickly removed from the area and placed in segregation. The correctional officers involved in the initial discovery provided brief, shaken accounts of what they saw and heard. Their reports noted the rapid escalation from muffled sounds to unmistakable signs of a violent confrontation. They described the struggle to get the door open and the immediate, horrifying tableau that greeted them. The facility went into partial lockdown, a ripple of tension spreading through the concrete corridors. For the investigators arriving from outside the prison walls, this was not a typical crime scene. The controlled environment of a correctional facility presented its own unique set of challenges and constraints. Every movement, every item, every interaction within these walls was potentially documented, scheduled, or observed. Yet despite the layers of security and routine, a deadly act had unfolded in a small, unremarkable room. The question immediately became how? How? In a place designed to prevent unauthorized items and limit physical contact, had an inmate been able to perpetrate such violence? And what could have happened during a seemingly routine visit to trigger such a catastrophic outcome? The initial reports were clinical, focusing on the physical evidence and the immediate circumstances of the discovery. But beneath the surface of procedural detail lay the human element, a marriage, a visit meant to maintain a connection, ending in a devastating act within the confines of incarceration. The investigation had just begun, focusing first on securing the scene and understanding the moments leading up to the officers' forced entry. The silence in the visit room, now broken only by the whirring of cameras and the quiet directives of forensic personnel, held its secrets tightly. What had transpired in those final minutes before the door burst open remained shrouded in the immediate aftermath of the violence. Investigators immediately began to piece together the timeline leading up to Sarah Jenkins's visit on that Thursday afternoon at SCI Phoenix. Her car had entered the prison grounds just before 1 hour on p.m., passing through the security checkpoint. She had followed the standard protocol for visitors checking in, presenting identification, and undergoing a search. These procedures were designed to prevent the introduction of contraband, including weapons or communication devices. Records indicated she cleared security without incident and proceeded to the visitation area. Michael Jenkins, incarcerated since 2017 following a conviction in Montgomery County, was escorted from his housing unit to the visitation block around the same time. His movement was logged, and he was also subjected to a search before entering the designated visiting area. The small meeting room where the incident occurred was one of several private, non-contact rooms used for specific types of visits or meetings, offering slightly more privacy than the open visitation hall but still monitored. These rooms were typically used for legal counsel, therapy sessions, or sometimes for more sensitive family discussions, away from the general population. Security protocol mandated visual monitoring of these rooms, either through windows in the door, or, in some cases, through camera. The specific monitoring status of Room B3 on that afternoon became a critical line of inquiry. Initial reports from correctional staff suggested the monitoring was periodic, relying on officers passing by the door window. Sarah Jenkins had arrived for a personal visit, not a legal one, suggesting the use of this particular room might have been requested or assigned for reasons not immediately clear. Her stated purpose for the visit was standard: to see her husband. She had visited him numerous times throughout his incarceration. There was nothing in the scheduling logs or security notes to indicate this visit was different or posed any specific risk. The visit commenced shortly after 1:15 p.m. The door was closed and the couple was left alone, save for the mandated visual checks. The time frame for the visit was standard, typically lasting for a few hours unless terminated early. The first indication of trouble came around 3:45 p.m., when an officer conducting a routine check noticed a disturbance through the window. The officer's report was brief but alarming, noting signs of a struggle and distress inside the room. Attempts to gain entry were met with resistance from within, necessitating the use of force to open the door. The state of the room upon entry was chaotic, furniture overturned, items scattered. Sarah Jenkins was unresponsive. Michael Jenkins was present and immediately secured. The sheer brutality of the scene, in a location meant for conversation and limited physical contact, raised immediate questions about the means of the attack. How could such severe injuries be inflicted without a conventional weapon? Investigators began examining the room's contents minutely. The metal table, bolted down, was a potential source of a blunt object if somehow disassembled, but the bolts appeared intact. The chairs were also heavy metal but not easily broken. The focus quickly returned to the specific object found near Sarah Jenkins's body. It was identified as a metal leg from one of the chairs, seemingly broken off. The force required to sever a heavy-duty metal chair leg was significant, suggesting either a pre-existing weakness or the application of extreme force. This discovery immediately shifted the investigation's focus from how a weapon was introduced to how one was created within the room itself. This raised another critical question. Was the breaking of the chair leg a spontaneous act in the heat of the moment, or had Michael Jenkins somehow prepared for the possibility of violence? The initial observations pointed towards a sudden, explosive act, but the severity and nature of the injuries compelled investigators to consider all possibilities, including a chilling degree of intent. The silence in the room after the officers arrived was profound, a stark contrast to the violence that had just occurred. The immediate need was to understand the physical evidence, but the underlying motive for such an extreme act within a prison visit remained a deep, unsettling mystery. With the scene secured and initial observations complete, the forensic team began their detailed examination of Room B3 at SCI Phoenix. Blood spatter analysis was crucial in reconstructing the event. Patterns on the walls and floor indicated the direction and force of the blows. The concentration of spatter suggested the primary attack occurred in a specific area of the room, consistent with where Sarah Jenkins's body was found. Photographs were taken from multiple angles, documenting every stain, every impression, every disturbance of the sterile environment. The broken chair leg was collected as the likely murder weapon. Its jagged edge and weight made it a formidable, albeit improvised, tool of violence. Forensic analysis of the leg would seek traces of blood, tissue, or fibers connecting it definitively to the victim and the attack. How the leg was broken from the chair remained a key question. Investigators examined the chair frame left behind, noting the point of fracture. It appeared consistent with repeated forceful bending, perhaps against the edge of the bolted table or the door frame. This suggested a struggle or a period of intense effort preceding the final fatal assault. The time of death was initially estimated based on the body's condition, placing it within the time frame of the visit, likely shortly before officers forced entry. Later, the official autopsy would provide a more precise estimate and detail the specific injuries. While the physical evidence from the room was being meticulously collected, other aspects of the investigation commenced. Correctional officers who were on duty in the visitation block were interviewed in detail. They recounted their duties, their observations, and specifically what sounds, if any, they had heard emanating from room B3 before the alarm was raised. Their accounts varied slightly, some recalling indistinct raised voices, others remembering a sudden noise, perhaps a crash, followed by silence or muffled sounds. No one reported a sustained loud argument from the outset of the visit. Simultaneously, investigators began delving into the backgrounds of both Michael and Sarah Jenkins. Michael's prison record was examined for any history of violence during his incarceration, disciplinary issues, or signs of psychological distress. His original conviction for aggravated assault, while outside the scope of the murder investigation, painted a picture of a man capable of serious violence. However, his record within the prison was reportedly unremarkable, characterized by compliance with rules and participation in programs. Sarah Jenkins's life, outside the prison walls, was also being explored. Friends, family, and co-workers were contacted. They described her as a dedicated mother, though it was unclear if the couple had children together, or if she had children from a previous relationship. Investigators would clarify this: a reliable employee, and a woman who had navigated the challenges of maintaining a relationship with an incarcerated spouse. The interviews sought to understand the nature of their marriage under these circumstances. Had it been strained? Were there recent conflicts? Had Sarah expressed fear or concern about her visits? The picture that began to emerge from these interviews suggested difficulties, the inherent pressures of separation exacerbated by the realities of prison life. Maintaining intimacy and connection through brief supervised visits and limited communication channels was a constant struggle. Questions arose about the financial strain, the emotional toll, and the future of their relationship given Michael's lengthy sentence. While gathering this background information, investigators also focused on any communication between Michael and Sarah leading up to the visit. Prison phone calls were typically recorded, and mail was often read. These records could potentially reveal the state of their relationship in the days and weeks before the fatal visit. Had there been arguments or tensions conveyed through these channels? Was there any indication that the upcoming visit was anticipated with dread or apprehension by either party? The evidence from the room provided the how, an improvised weapon used with brutal force. The deeper investigation into the lives of Michael and Sarah Jenkins sought to uncover the why. The sterile environment of the meeting room offered no easy answers, holding silent witness to the final violent moments of a marriage under duress. What specific catalyst had turned a routine visit into a scene of murder remained unknown, a crucial piece of the puzzle that the backgrounds and communication records might illuminate. As the investigation broadened, the focus intensified on the dynamics of Michael and Sarah Jenkins's marriage during his incarceration. Interviews with Sarah's family and friends began to reveal a narrative of increasing strain. While Sarah remained committed to visiting Michael, sometimes traveling a significant distance to SEI Phoenix, those close to her had observed a change. They described her as becoming more distant, often appearing tired or preoccupied after visits or phone calls. Conversations with them indicated that the realities of Michael's lengthy sentence were weighing heavily on her. The initial commitment to wait for him had begun to falter under the pressure of living a life on the outside while he remained confined. Several individuals close to Sarah indicated she had recently confided in them about the difficulty of maintaining the relationship and her feelings of loneliness and isolation. There were mentions of her contemplating ending the marriage, but she was reportedly hesitant to discuss this directly with Michael, fearing his reaction, or the emotional weight of such a conversation during their limited interactions. This growing emotional distance and contemplation of separation formed a crucial backdrop to the events in the meeting room. Investigators began reviewing recorded phone calls and intercepted mail between Michael and Sarah from the months preceding the murder. These communications revealed moments of affection, but were increasingly punctuated by tension. Arguments about finances, jealousy regarding her life outside, and frustration over the limitations of their contact were evident. There were instances where Michael expressed suspicion or possessiveness, questioning Sarah about her activities and relationships. Sarah's responses in these communications sometimes appeared guarded, attempting to navigate his insecurities while also asserting her own need for independence. A specific set of letters exchanged in the weeks leading up to the visit became particularly significant. While not explicitly mentioning infidelity, they hinted at a major point of contention that Sarah intended to discuss during her upcoming visit. Friends recalled Sarah mentioning a difficult conversation she needed to have with Michael. One friend quoted Sarah saying, "I just need to be honest with him face to face. It's not fair to either of us otherwise." This statement, made shortly before her final visit, suggested that the purpose of her trip to SEI Phoenix that day was not merely a routine check-in, but a planned confrontation or revelation. The midpoint reveal. Evidence unearthed through Sarah's communications and witness statements strongly suggested she intended to inform Michael during this visit that she was leaving him, and potentially, that she was involved with someone else. This information, conveyed within the confined, emotionally charged environment of the prison meeting room, provided a powerful potential motive for the sudden, extreme violence. The timeline now focused on the specific moments within the visit, when this conversation might have taken place. Prison visit logs indicated Sarah arrived at 1:05 p.m. Michael was escorted in at 1:10 p.m., and the visit began around 1:15 p.m. Officers discovered the scene at approximately 3:45 p.m. This left a window of over 2.5 hours during which the conversation unfolded and the violence occurred. The question became, exactly when did Sarah deliver the news, and how did Michael react in the immediate aftermath? Was the decision to attack instantaneous, or did it build over a period of minutes after the revelation? The lack of prolonged loud argument before the officers were alerted suggested the critical conversation might have been relatively brief, or the reaction swift and overwhelming. This revelation about Sarah's likely intent fundamentally shifted the investigation's perspective. What initially appeared as potentially random or unprovoked violence in a secure environment now had a clear, devastating emotional catalyst. The sterile meeting room had become the stage for a final fatal confrontation rooted in betrayal and desperation. The focus now turned to reconstructing the sequence of events inside that room after Sarah delivered the news that would shatter Michael Jenkins's world. Confined as he already was, the reconstruction of events inside room B3 relied heavily on forensic evidence and the limited observations of correctional staff. Based on the blood spatter analysis and the location of Sarah Jenkins's body, investigators determined the primary assault occurred near the bolted metal table. The broken chair leg, identified as the murder weapon, bore traces of Sarah's blood and tissue, confirming its role in the attack. The injuries detailed in the autopsy report, severe blunt force trauma to the head, were consistent with repeated, forceful blows from an object like the chair leg. The sequence likely began after Sarah delivered the devastating news about her intentions to leave, and her infidelity. While no witnesses were inside the room during the crucial moments, the timing of the officer's alert, around 3:45 p.m., suggested the violence erupted relatively late in the visit, more than 2 hours after it began. This aligns with the idea that a significant conversation took place first. The minimal noise reported by officers before the disturbance indicated the initial part of the conversation was likely subdued, perhaps tense, but not overtly confrontational. The transition from conversation to extreme violence must have been sudden and explosive. It is hypothesized that upon hearing Sarah's confession or statement of intent to end the marriage, Michael's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Trapped by his incarceration, the news of losing his wife and perhaps her involvement with another man would have represented a complete collapse of his external connection and any hope for a future outside prison walls. This specific psychological pressure, combined with a potential predisposition for violence evidenced by his original conviction, likely fueled the extreme rage. The act of breaking the chair leg itself required significant force. Forensic examination of the chair frame from which the leg was detached suggested it was not broken in a single blow, but likely required repeated leverage or striking against a hard surface, such as the edge of the heavy metal table or the floor. This effort might have taken seconds, or even a minute or two, fueled by adrenaline and fury. Midpoint twist. While initially presumed to be a spontaneous act of improvisation, the investigation explored whether Michael Jenkins had identified the potential of the chair legs as weapons before the visit, or if his rage simply fixated on the nearest available heavy object. Prison sources indicated that while chair legs had been broken in the past through rough handling, deliberately weaponizing one in a visit room was highly unusual and required significant force. This wasn't a fragile piece of furniture. It implied a desperate, powerful act born of immediate, overwhelming emotion. The attack sequence likely involved Michael overpowering Sarah, who was seated or standing near the table, and using the broken chair leg to inflict the fatal injuries. The spatial analysis of the blood spatter supported this, showing impact patterns consistent with blows delivered within a confined space. There were signs of a brief struggle, overturned chairs, scattered items, indicating Sarah's attempt to defend herself or escape. The officers heard the sounds of this struggle just before forcing the door. Upon entry, they found Michael Jenkins in close proximity to Sarah, the broken chair leg discarded nearby. His state at that moment was described as agitated and non-compliant, before officers subdued him. He did not immediately attempt to flee the room, nor did he surrender peacefully. His focus appeared solely on Sarah and the immediate aftermath of his actions. Forensic collection from Michael's clothing and person revealed Sarah's blood, further linking him directly to the assault. His hands showed signs of injury consistent with the immense force required to break the chair leg and wield it as a weapon. The transition from a quiet, albeit tense, conversation to a scene of such horrific violence in a supposedly secure location underscored the volatile nature of extreme human emotion, particularly when constrained by the physical and emotional limitations of incarceration. The sterile meeting room had become a pressure cooker, and Sarah's revelation had been the catalyst for its devastating explosion. The immediate question that followed his apprehension was what he would say, if anything, about the minutes that had transpired after the door closed and before the officers burst through. Following his apprehension, Michael Jenkins was immediately transported from the visitation block to a restricted area within SCI Phoenix. His clothing was carefully collected as evidence, showing significant bloodstaining identified through preliminary testing as Sarah Jenkins's. Forensic examination of his hands revealed abrasions and bruising, consistent with the forceful act of breaking the metal chair leg and wielding it as a weapon. He was placed in isolation and remained largely uncommunicative in the immediate hours after the incident. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins's body was transported from SCI Phoenix to the Montgomery County Medical Examiner's office for autopsy. The official autopsy report provided a clinical yet stark account of the violence. It confirmed blunt force trauma as the cause of death, detailing multiple impacts to the head and upper body. The report meticulously documented the size, shape, and nature of the wounds, corroborating the use of the broken chair leg. It also noted defensive injuries on Sarah's arms and hands, consistent with her attempting to ward off the blows. The estimated time of death provided by the medical examiner aligned with the window investigators had established, placing it squarely within the time frame of the visit. While the forensic evidence from the scene and the autopsy detailed the how, investigators continued to press forward on the why. Initial attempts to interview Michael Jenkins proved difficult. He was agitated, sometimes wept, and at other times appeared withdrawn. His initial statements, when he did speak, were rambling and focused on his feelings of betrayal and anger. He did not deny the physical altercation, but struggled to articulate a coherent account of the moments leading up to it. His immediate behavior was a mix of shock and simmering rage. One correctional officer present during his initial processing noted Michael muttering about lies and how she deserved it after being told about Sarah's death. This fragmented confession, though not a formal statement, provided an early glimpse into his state of mind. Legal representation was quickly secured for Michael, and formal interviews would require the presence of his counsel. The focus of the investigation then shifted back to corroborating the motive of infidelity and planned separation through external sources. Investigators continued to interview Sarah Jenkins's family, friends, and colleagues. These interviews consistently reinforced the narrative of her increasing unhappiness in the marriage, and her intent to leave Michael. Several individuals shared specific conversations where Sarah had discussed the difficulty of telling Michael and her apprehension about his reaction. One friend recounted a phone call where Sarah had explicitly stated she needed to tell Michael about a new relationship she had begun, feeling it was necessary for closure and her own future. This conversation, happening days before the visit, solidified the investigative theory that the purpose of her trip was indeed to end the marriage and reveal the infidelity. The collective testimony painted a picture of Sarah Jenkins as a woman trying to regain control of her life after years of it being defined by her husband's incarceration. Her decision to visit Michael and deliver the news in person, while perhaps intended as a difficult act of honesty, tragically placed her in a vulnerable position within a controlled, isolated environment. The confluence of her revelation and Michael's confined circumstances, coupled with his apparent history of violence, proved to be a fatal combination. The investigation now had a clear path, proved that Sarah intended to end the marriage due to infidelity, that she communicated this to Michael during the visit, and that this revelation directly triggered his violent response, resulting in her death via the improvised weapon. The physical evidence from Room B3 and the autopsy provided irrefutable proof of the act. The witness statements and communication records built the case for the motive and the sequence of emotional events. The picture was becoming clearer, but the quiet devastation of the event, a visit ending in murder, lingered over the clinical facts. As the investigation delved deeper, a clearer picture of Sarah Jenkins's life outside SEI Phoenix began to emerge, solidifying the motive behind her fatal visit. Interviews with her friends and family consistently indicated that she had indeed developed a new relationship in the years Michael was incarcerated. This relationship, while conducted discreetly, had become significant to her, representing a path toward rebuilding her life. Sources close to her stated that she felt increasing guilt and conflicted loyalty towards Michael, recognizing the unfairness of his situation, while also acknowledging her own needs and desire for a future that did not involve waiting indefinitely for his release. Communication records between Michael and Sarah, including phone calls and letters reviewed by prison authorities, offered glimpses into the growing chasm between them. While containing professions of love and commitment, they also showed Michael's underlying anxieties and controlling tendencies. He frequently questioned her about her activities, expressed jealousy over her interactions with others, and voiced fears of being forgotten or replaced. Sarah's responses were often attempts to reassure him while also maintaining some degree of independence, a difficult balance to strike. Several letters from Michael contained increasingly desperate pleas for her to remain loyal and committed, sometimes bordering on manipulative language referencing his difficult life inside. Sarah's later letters became more guarded, expressing fatigue and uncertainty about their future. While prison staff typically monitored communications, the nuances of a relationship breakdown and the specific details of infidelity could be difficult to detect unless explicitly stated. It is believed that the full extent of Sarah's new relationship was not known to Michael through these channels prior to the visit. This supported the theory that Sarah chose the visit to deliver the news in person, perhaps hoping to manage his reaction or offer a sense of closure. One particular piece of evidence unearthed during the investigation was a letter from Sarah to a friend, written a week before the visit. In it, she described her plan to tell Michael everything. She wrote of her nervousness but also her resolve, stating she felt it was time to be completely honest, no matter how painful. She acknowledged Michael's potential for anger but expressed hope that they could reach some understanding. This letter, discovered by investigators searching Sarah's home, served as powerful corroboration of her intent for the visit. Simultaneously, investigators examined Michael Jenkins's history and psychological profile. His original conviction involved a violent act, indicating a capacity for aggression. While his prison record was largely unremarkable, sources within the facility noted he could be possessive and struggled with feelings of powerlessness inherent to incarceration. The combination of his personality, his history of violence, and the shock of learning about his wife's infidelity and intent to leave would have created an exceptionally volatile psychological state. The prison environment, while controlled, offered no immediate escape valve for such intense emotion, trapping him in a confined space with the object of his rage. The decision to charge Michael Jenkins with murder was a clear legal step. The physical evidence supported the act, and the mounting circumstantial evidence, including Sarah's communications and witness statements, built a compelling case for motive and the sequence of emotional events leading to the attack. The legal process would now begin, moving the case from the investigative phase to prosecution. Michael Jenkins faced the prospect of adding decades, potentially a life sentence, to his existing incarceration for a crime committed within the very walls meant to contain him. The question for the court would be whether the act was premeditated, planned even in the most rudimentary sense, like identifying the chair leg as a potential weapon, or a spontaneous heat of passion killing triggered by the devastating news. The outcome would depend on the interpretation of his actions in the sterile, now infamous, room. Legal proceedings against Michael Jenkins commenced swiftly following his indictment for the murder of Sarah Jenkins. He was formally charged with homicide, with the specific degree of the charge: first-degree murder, premeditated; third-degree murder, heat of passion, reckless disregard, or voluntary manslaughter, to be argued based on the evidence. At his arraignment in Montgomery County Court, Michael Jenkins entered a plea of not guilty. His demeanor in court was somber, a stark contrast to the agitated state described by correctional officers immediately after the incident. He sat mostly silent, conferring occasionally with his newly appointed defense counsel. The prosecution's case hinged on establishing that Michael Jenkins, upon learning of Sarah's infidelity and intent to leave, acted with the specific intent to kill. While the defense might argue a crime of passion, emphasizing the sudden, overwhelming nature of the revelation, the prosecution would highlight the violent nature of the attack, the effort required to break the chair leg, and the sustained nature of the assault, as evidence of intent to cause death or serious bodily harm. Key evidence presented by the prosecution included the forensic findings from Room B3 at SEI Phoenix. Detailed testimony from forensic analysts described the blood spatter patterns, the identification of the broken chair leg as the murder weapon, and the evidence of struggle. The medical examiner's testimony, outlining the severe and ultimately fatal injuries sustained by Sarah Jenkins, was particularly impactful. Photographs of the scene, depicting the overturned furniture and the blood-stained room, provided a grim visual account of the violence. The prosecution also introduced the evidence gathered from Sarah Jenkins's life outside the prison walls. Testimony from her friends and family recounted her increasing unhappiness in the marriage, her new relationship, and her expressed intent to inform Michael during the visit. Sarah's letter to her friend, detailing her plan to reveal everything, was a crucial piece of evidence demonstrating her clear intention for the visit, and implicitly setting the stage for the confrontation. While prison communications were not explicitly cited as revealing the infidelity before the visit, excerpts from his letters and phone calls were used to demonstrate Michael's controlling behavior, his fear of abandonment, and the escalating tension in the marriage, providing context for his potential reaction. The defense focused on the emotional shock of the infidelity revelation within the confines of the prison environment. They argued that Michael Jenkins, stripped of control and faced with the complete loss of his most significant connection to the outside world, reacted spontaneously in a moment of extreme emotional distress. They contended the breaking of the chair leg was an impulsive act of rage, not premeditation, and the subsequent assault was a result of a temporary loss of control, arguing for a lesser charge such as voluntary manslaughter or third-degree murder. They highlighted his relatively clean disciplinary record within the prison as evidence that this outburst was an anomaly, triggered by an extraordinary emotional blow. However, the prosecution countered by emphasizing Michael Jenkins's history of violence, suggesting the capacity for such an act was inherent, and the specific circumstances merely provided the trigger. They argued that the force and repetition of the blows indicated a deliberate intent to kill, not merely injure, and that even a brief period of breaking the chair leg constituted sufficient time for intent to form. The courtroom proceedings laid bare the final tragic moments of the Jenkins marriage, contrasting Sarah's quiet steps towards independence with Michael's violent reaction to losing control. The sterile details of forensic science met the raw, devastating account of human emotion under extreme duress. The judge, or jury, would ultimately weigh the evidence, considering the specific environment of the prison meeting room and the emotional powder keg created by Sarah's confession, to determine Michael Jenkins's ultimate culpability. The verdict would hinge on whether his actions were deemed a premeditated act or an impulsive explosion of rage. The trial of Michael Jenkins culminated in a verdict that reflected the court's interpretation of the complex interplay between motive, intent, and the unique environment of the crime scene. After weeks of testimony presenting the stark forensic evidence alongside the emotional narrative of a collapsing marriage, the jury delivered its decision. Michael Jenkins was found guilty of third-degree murder. This verdict indicated the jury believed he had caused Sarah Jenkins's death with malice and a general disregard for her life, but that the act was not premeditated. They likely accepted the argument that the killing occurred in the heat of passion, triggered by the sudden revelation of infidelity and separation during the visit in Room B3 at SEI Phoenix. While recognizing the profound emotional provocation, the verdict of third-degree murder rejected the defense's argument for voluntary manslaughter, which would imply an even greater degree of immediate, uncontrollable rage. It also rejected the prosecution's argument for first-degree murder, finding insufficient evidence of planning or deliberation prior to the moment the revelation occurred. The breaking of the chair leg, while requiring effort, was likely seen as a spontaneous act of creating a weapon in the moment of extreme emotional distress, rather than a pre-planned move. During the sentencing phase, the court considered the details of the crime, the impact on the victim's family, and Michael Jenkins's background, including his original sentence. Sarah Jenkins's family provided victim impact statements, describing their devastation and the loss of their daughter, sister, and friend. They spoke of the brutal circumstances of her death, occurring during a visit meant to maintain a connection, within the supposedly secure environment of a prison. The judge emphasized the gravity of the crime, noting the extreme violence used and the tragic location where it occurred. Michael Jenkins was sentenced to an additional term of incarceration, typically a significant number of years or a life sentence depending on Pennsylvania law for third-degree murder, to be served consecutively to his existing sentence. The new sentence effectively ensured he would spend the remainder of his life in prison. The specific details of his new sentence, added to his existing one, meant that the sterile room in SCI Phoenix had not only been the site of his wife's death, but had also sealed his own fate within the correctional system permanently. The judge's words during sentencing highlighted the devastating consequences of unchecked rage and the unique vulnerability created when personal crises unfold in a controlled environment designed for containment, not emotional volatility. The case of Sarah Jenkins's murder within the walls of SCI Phoenix near Collegeville, PA, drew to a close legally, but its impact rippled outward. The legal proceedings concluded, but the aftermath of the murder inside Room B3 at SCI Phoenix lingered, a grim reminder of the intersection of human crisis and institutional confinement. For the family of Sarah Jenkins, the verdict and sentencing offered a form of legal closure, but did little to alleviate the profound grief and shock of losing her in such a brutal and unexpected manner. The image of her final moments, trapped in a small sterile room with the man she had come to visit, remained a source of immense pain. Her decision to confront Michael with the truth, an act born perhaps of a desire for honesty and closure, had tragically led to her death in the most violent way imaginable. Friends and family grappled with the knowledge of her internal struggles and her difficult path toward independence, which was cut short so abruptly. For the staff at SCI Phoenix, the incident was a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of human behavior, even within a highly controlled environment. The security protocols, designed to prevent external threats, proved insufficient against the internal combustion of rage fueled by personal crisis. The meeting room itself, Room B3, became a marked space, its mundane function forever overshadowed by the violence it contained on that Thursday afternoon. While such rooms were necessary for the function of the facility, this specific location became a site associated with tragedy. The incident also raised questions about how emotional support and conflict resolution are managed within the prison system, particularly during visits that carry the potential for high emotional stakes. Michael Jenkins remained incarcerated within the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections system, now serving effectively a life sentence for the murder of his wife, added to his original term. His existence was now even more defined by the concrete and steel walls that contained him, the sterile environment of the prison representing the totality of his future. The sterile meeting room, a place meant for brief, strained connections to the outside, had become the place where his most significant connections with the outside had become the place where his most significant connection was severed permanently by his own hand. The case serves as a haunting example of how deeply personal conflicts can erupt with devastating consequences, even in the most unlikely and supposedly secure locations. The quiet devastation was not confined to the small room or the prison walls. It spread to Sarah's community, her workplace, and among everyone who knew her. The sterile efficiency of the correctional facility could contain Michael Jenkins, but it could not contain the ripple effects of the violence he perpetrated. The story of the murder in the meeting room at SCI Phoenix near Collegeville, Pennsylvania, became a grim footnote in the history of both the facility and the lives it irrevocably altered, leaving behind a quiet, permanent scar on the landscape of a seemingly peaceful Pennsylvania town and the hearts of those who lost Sarah Jenkins. The metal chair leg, once a simple piece of furniture, became a symbol of how quickly the mundane can turn lethal when fueled by betrayal and rage in a confined space. The silence that fell over Room B3 after the officers arrived was not just the absence of noise, it was the heavy silence of finality, of a life ended and another life permanently consumed by the consequences.